And during that time, we'll have live coverage of President Obama's first news conference of the year that's scheduled for 1:15 Eastern. When the Senate returns at 2:15, they'll vote on a pair of judicial nominations. Now live to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. O God, who put into our hearts such deep desires that we can't be at peace until we rest in you, satisfy the longings of our souls with your merciful presence. Lord, open the minds of our lawmakers to the counsels of your eternal wisdom, breathing into their hearts your peace, which passes understanding. Increase their hunger for justice in our nation and world, as they find grace to seek first your kingdom. May their moments and days ever flow in ceaseless praise. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 6, 2012, to the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, the Senate will be in the period of morning business for an hour. The majority will control the first half, the Republicans the second half. Following morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 1813, which is the Surface Transportation Bill. Filing deadline for secondary amendments is today at 11:30. At noon, there will be cloture vote on this substitute amendment. The Senate will recess from 12:30 until 2:15 p.m. to allow for weekly caucus meetings. At 2:15, there will be 2 votes on confirmation of Phillips and Rice to be judges. Would the chair announce the business today?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, there will now be a period of morning business for 60 minutes, with senators permitted to speak therein up to 10 minutes, with the time equally controlled and divided by the 2 leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Mr. President.
The senator from Washington State.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today to urge my colleagues to vote in support of Thomas Rice. He's been nominated to serve as the next federal judge for the Eastern District of my home state of Washington. Mr. Rice is a distinguished attorney who has dedicated his professional career to serving the public in the U.S. Attorney's Office. In that time, he has earned the respect of federal judges, opposing defense attorneys, his fellow prosecutors, and local law enforcement officials. Mr. Rice has a deep connection to Eastern Washington and its legal community. He graduated from Gonzaga University with a degree in accounting, and then he returned on a full scholarship to earn his law degree. After earning that degree, Mr. Rice moved directly into public service as a trial attorney with the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. He then returned to the Eastern District to work in the U.S. Attorney's Office, climbing the ranks to become the first U.S. attorney responsible for the management of the Spokane office. And he is currently the highest-ranking career DOJ official in the Eastern District. Over his 20 years in practice, Mr. Rice has tried over 1,000 criminal cases dealing with nearly every area of federal law. He has gone above and beyond his duties, volunteering additional hours at the office, taking on extra cases, and establishing the local Anti-Terrorism Advisory Council, which brings together representatives from every law enforcement agency in the Eastern District. As the Assistant U.S. Attorney, he has earned the reputation of being tough on crime, but also level-headed and fair in the conduct of his prosecutions. Mr. Rice clearly meets the standards of fairness, even-handedness, and adherence to the law we expect of our federal judges. So, Mr. President, I know I speak on behalf of so many in the Washington State legal community in supporting his nomination today. Mr. Rice's nomination was the product of a bipartisan selection commission that we use in the state of Washington, and he received strong endorsements from both sides of the aisle. We continue to use our bipartisan selection process in Washington State despite the fact that it does take more time and a lot of effort, because it works to select judges of the highest quality and because it's intended to remove partisanship in the selection of our judges. So, Mr. President, you would think that someone like Thomas Rice would be able to move through this process very quickly and get to work on the court. Well, unfortunately, some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have slowed down and delayed this vote. Mr. Rice's nomination was actually reported out of the Judiciary Committee in October of last year, unanimously, with strong bipartisan support, almost 4 months ago. But his nomination has sat on the executive calendar because some Senate Republicans refused to consent to debate and vote on nominations just like his. Now, I haven't heard any objections from Republicans about Mr. Rice's qualifications, nor have I heard any Republican claim that they had been unfairly blocked from any process. This delay is the result of an unprecedented effort by Senate Republicans to delay and block all of President Obama's judicial nominees. There are now 20 judicial nominations reported favorably by the Judiciary Committee that are still sitting and waiting on a final Senate vote. 14 of those nominations have been pending since last year and should have been confirmed before the end of last year. 18 of those nominations received strong bipartisan support from the Judiciary Committee, and they deserve to move through this process in a fair way and get a vote here on the floor of the Senate, especially when both sides have agreed they're going to pass. Because even though Republicans are making this about politics here in D.C., this does have a real impact on our families and the court system throughout America. Nearly 10% of the federal judgeships remain vacant right now. 10%. 130 million Americans live in districts or circuits that have a vacancy that could be filled today if the Republican obstruction would end on nominations that have been vetted, considered, and favorably reported by the Judiciary Committee, including families in the Eastern District of my home state. This kind of obstruction is not good for our country. It hurts families' ability to access the courts in a timely fashion, and it puts politics ahead of our justice system. So I urge all of our colleagues today to vote in support of Thomas Rice. He's a great lawyer. He's a community leader who I will believe will make an exceptional federal judge. And I really come today to also call on Republicans to end their obstruction, allow us to move forward quickly on debates and votes on these judicial nominations that have been backlogged for far too long. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Illinois.
As consent, the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we live in a time when public trust in all of our government institutions is at an all-time low and unfortunately continues to deteriorate. Recent polls indicate public confidence in Congress is at 11%, which is a record low approval rating. Now, Americans have been skeptical of politicians in general and Congress in particular from the beginning of this republic. It is a healthy skepticism which reflects the freedoms that are part of our democracy and the right of people to disagree with leadership with impunity under our Constitution, with some limitations. And so I take it in historical context, but still cannot escape the reality that the numbers today are lower than ever. The legislative branch is not the only branch of government that the public holds in low regard. Polls also indicate the U.S. Supreme Court has recently received its second lowest approval rating in history. One way that those of us who serve in government can increase public trust and confidence is to be more transparent about how we operate, the standards to which we are held. The recent passage of the Stock Act in the United States Senate is an indication of a continuing effort to alert the public about things that we do as members of Congress which bear scrutiny. I make a disclosure each year which goes beyond the requirements of the law, and many others do as well. The Stock Act will bring many members of Congress to even a higher level of disclosure, as they should be. One way that we can increase our confidence in the institutions of government is to address those aspects which add to transparency and add to trust. I think it's time for the Supreme Court to provide more transparency and accountability in two specific areas. First, the Supreme Court should allow live television cameras to broadcast open court sessions so the general public can see firsthand how the court operates and arrives at critical decisions that literally change our lives. Second, the Supreme Court should formally adopt the Judicial Code of Conduct, which currently applies to all other federal judges, but for some inexplicable reason doesn't apply to justices of the Supreme Court. The court should also make public the other ethics rules that it follows. The Supreme Court decisions impact the lives of every American, but access to open sessions of the court is incredibly limited. As a result, the court's proceedings and the way it arrives at decisions are a mystery. Most Americans will never see the Supreme Court at work unless they're willing and able to travel to Washington, D.C., wait in line for hours, or sometimes sleep outside overnight on the pavement in an effort to secure one of 250 seats in the Supreme Court courtroom. In a democratic society that values transparency and openness, there is no valid justification for such a powerful element of our government to operate largely outside the view of American people. I'm pleased to have partnered with Senator Chuck Grassley, my Republican colleague from Iowa, the Cameras in the Courtroom Act, S. 1945. He and I continue the work of our former colleague, Senator Specter, on this important issue. Our bill would require televising of all open sessions of the court unless a majority of the justices determined that doing so would violate due process rights of one or more of the parties before the court. We give to the court the last word on any given argument or case as to whether or not it will be public and televised. In the coming weeks, the Supreme Court is going to consider the constitutionality of one of the most important pieces of legislation to be considered by Congress and signed by the President in decades, the Affordable Care Act. During the year-long congressional debate on health care reform, every hearing, floor debate, and vote was accessible to every American with a television set or a webcast and a computer at all times. The American people should have the same opportunity to watch the open session of the Supreme Court as it considers the constitutionality of health care reform legislation. On this point, there is bipartisan agreement. Despite our strong disagreements about the substance of the Affordable Care Act, Democrats and Republicans from both chambers have written to the Supreme Court urging them to permit live video and audio broadcasts of the health care reform argument. The court should allow live broadcasts of the health care reform hearing and all other open sessions of the court, since each of the court's decisions has the potential to have a transformative impact on the lives of so many Americans. There are some that say we should not allow cameras in the Supreme Court because only bits and pieces of court proceedings would be televised, and they might be taken out of context. That reminds me of the editorial from a few years ago, and here's what it said. Keeping cameras out to prevent people from getting the wrong idea is a little like removing the paintings from an art museum out of fear that visitors might not have the art history background to appreciate them. Similar arguments were made when the consideration was given to televising these proceedings. Nevertheless, for 2 decades, the legislative sessions and committee meetings of the Senate and House have been broadcast live, and the legislative branch is better for it. The majority of states permit live video coverage in some or all of their courts. It is time the Supreme Court did the same. Mr. President, I'm sure you have found when you've gone back home, there are people who watch C-SPAN nonstop. I have literally had people in my hometown of Springfield come up to me in the grocery store and say, is Senator Bernie Sanders feeling well? I saw him sitting at his desk and he looked a little bit pale. They follow it with such a close regard for the members and the speeches that it's a surprise to many of us who live in this institution and work in it every day. In my view, the Cameras in the Courtroom Act is a reasonable approach that balances the public's need for information and transparency with the constitutional rights of those who appear before the court. As in past years, Cameras in the Courtroom Act enjoys bipartisan support. I want to thank my colleagues, Senators Klobuchar, Cornyn, the presiding officer, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Schumer, Harkin, Gillibrand, and Begich for co-sponsoring the bill. These senators believe, as do Senator Grassley and myself, that public scrutiny of Supreme Court proceedings will produce greater accountability, transparency, and understanding. I'd like to thank Senator Leahy, Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, for scheduling my bill, the Cameras in the Courtroom Act, for a vote in the Judiciary Committee. It was reported out with a strong bipartisan vote, and it's now pending on the Senate calendar. The bill's been cleared by every Democratic senator for a vote by the full Senate. I'm still hoping we can bring it to the floor as quickly as possible. And now I'd like to touch on a related issue. Just as the Supreme Court hearings should be televised to the American people, so too should the court's ethical standards be available for review by the public. The ethics rules for all branches of government should be clear and public. When ethics decisions arise in the Senate, for example, the Senate Ethics Committee is responsible for enforcing the rules for senators and our employees. Everyone knows the standards and expectations for Congress because they are a matter of public record. That cannot be said for the Supreme Court of the United States. Our Supreme Court has publicly adopted some limited ethics rules, but not others. The Court does not have an ethics office, nor is it subject to the Judicial Conference, which regulates all other federal judges outside the Supreme Court. Instead, as the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court polices itself, and it asks the American people to just trust them. Of course, I have the highest respect for the justices' abilities and their judgment, and it's been my honor to come to know some of these justices personally over the years. But if the public is asked to trust the justices to police themselves, we're at least entitled to know the rules that they play by. To its credit, some of the Supreme Court's ethics rules are already pretty clear. Through an internal resolution, the Supreme Court has adopted the same financial restrictions that apply to all other federal employees. I recently sent a letter with Senators Leahy, Whitehouse, Franken, Blumenthal, to John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, asking him to publicly release one of the Court's resolutions, which says that the justices will follow the same regulations on outside employment, honoraria, and income which apply to other federal judges. The Chief Justice agreed to our request and publicly released this resolution for the first time since it was adopted in 1991. I applaud Chief Justice Roberts' action. I encourage him and the other justices to continue on this path by releasing all of their ethics rules. Nevertheless, there is more work for the Supreme Court to do to increase transparency and accountability. The Court should either adopt a court resolution agreeing to follow the Judicial Code of Conduct, the same ethics code that applies to all other federal judges, or adopt and publicly disclose their own ethics code. Many have called for the Supreme Court to adopt the Judicial Code of Conduct. In response, Chief Justice Roberts has explained that the justices use the code as one source of guidance, but not the only source to decide ethics questions. Given that they already apply the code in practice, it seems like a logical next step for the Court to adopt its own resolution formally affirming this practice, or they can adopt a resolution making it clear which ethics rules do or do not apply. All of the justices deserve respect for the difficult and weighty decisions that they face. But as some of the most powerful members of our government, it is not too much to ask of them to make their ethical standards open and clear. By making their ethic rules more transparent, the justices will foster greater public trust and confidence in the court and its decisions. In conclusion, let me emphasize that I have a high regard for the Supreme Court and all of its justices. I do not intend to question or impugn any justice with my suggestions. But let's be clear. We live in an era where there is a great deal of mistrust in government institutions, starting with Congress, but through all branches of government. At the same time, modern technology enables us to provide the American people with more access to the workings of government, which could help to reduce some of this mistrust. I and many of my colleagues in the Senate have worked for many years to increase openness and transparency in Congress and the executive branch. I encourage the Supreme Court to take the same approach. Televising Supreme Court proceedings and making public the Court's ethics rules would be a good start. The American people deserve to be able to watch the Supreme Court arguments in cases that can affect their lives, and they deserve to know the ethical standards that govern the Court when it decides cases. Mr. President, I ask that the next statement I'm about to make is placed separate in the record from this opening statement relative to cameras in the courtroom.
Without objection.
As I went home this weekend, Mr. President, I mentioned yesterday on the floor, I spent a great deal of time in deep southern Illinois, where some devastating, fatal tornadoes hit last week. As I said then, and would repeat briefly now, the amazing outpouring of volunteerism and support from people far and wide was inspiring to me. It is great to know that just as I had hoped, the people in my state rallied to help the victims. There were formal organizations like the American Red Cross, informal organizations like Operation Blessing, which brought together churches from all over the area. There was a Methodist church from Carrier Mills with about 20 of their parishioners, some children with rakes doing everything they could to help clean up the mess. It was inspiring to see that, and I was happy for that. But I will tell you that in addition to the tornado issue that we faced, the one thing that hit people between the eyes in Illinois this last week were gasoline prices. I was up in the suburbs of Chicago on Friday evening and saw a gas station with regular gasoline for $4.09. I saw some lower prices over the weekend, but that was the high water mark or high gasoline mark in my state that I observed. People are very sensitive to this. Gasoline prices literally affect the lives of people individually and families as well. They also have a direct impact on business. I asked a vice president of Walmart about monitoring retail sales and how to increase retail sales, and he told me that with all of the hundreds and thousands of Walmart stores and employees, that they literally monitor sales by the second in real time. He said, I can observe the sales pattern in a store somewhere in America and tell you within a few pennies or dimes what the price of gasoline is in that community. When gasoline goes up, people put the money into the tank instead of on the counter, and they stay home instead of going out to shop. That's how the price of gasoline directly impacts economic recovery. I've listened to so many of the comments that have been made on the floor here by individuals on the other side, their approach on how to deal with the issue of gasoline prices and what to do with them. And I sometimes wonder, I see the senator from California is here, I sometimes wonder if we're reading the same basic information. Keystone Pipeline could serve a valuable purpose, but to believe that this is somehow going to have an immediate impact or any major impact on gasoline prices is not realistic. Currently, the pipelines from Canada that export these oil sands to the United States are operating at less than 50% of capacity. So there is plenty of room for more oil sands to come to the United States for refinement. In fact, one of the pipelines goes directly to my state, to the Conoco refinery in Wood River. And this refinery has capacity that can be used to process these Canadian oil sands right now. So to argue this Keystone Pipeline is somehow holding back the export of Canadian oil sands that might have an impact on gasoline prices just doesn't work. I also have noted that there's been a significant increase in the amount of oil exploration and drilling that's taken place under this administration. I believe that that's an indication of what we can and should do as a nation to deal with the problem of providing the oil resources in an environmentally responsible way. It's 2 years after the BP spill, and it's, I think, time for us to reflect on the fact that we never, ever want that to happen again. The devastation it caused to so many lives, to so many businesses, and to so much in terms of wildlife will not be calculated. Perhaps it never will be. But we know that we can't allow that to occur again. We shouldn't exalt speed over safety. We've got to make certain that as we move forward to develop our energy resources, both oil and gas, we do it in a sensible way. I hope that we can gather together and agree that is the way to approach it, along with the administration's proposals for more fuel efficiency in the vehicles that we drive and for the development of alternative fuels, which will be environmentally friendly and spark new innovation, new businesses, and new jobs in this country in the 21st century.
Would the Senator yield for a question?
I'd be happy to yield.
I want to thank my colleague for putting the gas price situation into the larger picture, and also note that one other factor playing a role is definitely manipulation due to some of the instability in the world that our President is certainly dealing with, and many of us here. The instability in Iran, the fact that we've got sanctions, the fact that there's also a greater demand coming for this product from China and other very high-growth areas. So I say to my friend, is he aware, I know he is, but because of the rules I have to ask it in a question, is he aware that we are producing far more of this resource, oil, in this country than we have done since 2008. We have many more rigs out there, and is my colleague also aware that the oil companies are sitting on over 50 million, well over 50 million acres of leases that they're not drilling on when they could. And last point, is my friend aware that we are exporting more than we ever had from America, and that's also a very important point. Those who say drill, baby, drill, that's not an answer if it's export, baby, export. The fact is we are drilling more, and more is leaving America. So I say to my friend, is he aware of all these factors, and is he as concerned as I am about the other side playing more politics with this? Because drill, baby, drill is not the answer. We're drilling more than ever. We only have 2% of the world's proven supply of oil. So I wonder if my friend could comment on those points.
I thank the senator from California, and in response, I'd like consent of the chair to enter into the record the New York Times editorial of Monday, March 5th, 2012, entitled "Drill, Baby, Drill Redux." It answers specifically what you have just raised, and I'd like to just read a portion of it. Domestic crude oil production is actually up from 5.4 million barrels a day in 2004 to 5.59 million now. Imports have dropped by more than 10% in the same period. Despite a temporary slowdown in exploration in the Gulf of Mexico after the BP oil disaster, the number of rigs in American oil fields has quadrupled over 3 years. There have been new discoveries, and the administration has promised to open up more offshore reserves. To say that Mr. Obama has denied industry access is nonsense. Equally nonsensical is the Republican claim that Mr. Obama's proposed repeal of $4 billion in annual tax breaks for the oil and gas industry, whose 5 biggest players posted $137 billion in profits last year, would drive prices upward. As is Newt Gingrich's claim that a proposal now taking shape at the EPA and fiercely opposed by refiners to lower sulfur content in gasoline would add 25 cents to the cost of a gallon. Agency experts say it would add about a penny. The truth is that oil prices are set on world market by forces largely beyond America's control. Chief among these is soaring demand in countries like China. Unrest in oil-producing countries is another factor. The Times noted fears in some quarters that gas could jump to $5 a gallon if the standoff with Iran disrupted world supply. Therein, the editorial said, lies the biggest weakness in the Republican litany. A country that consumes, as the senator from California noted, more than 20% of the world's oil supply, but owns 2% of its reserves, cannot drill its way out of high prices or dependence on exports from unstable countries. The only plausible strategy is to keep production up while cutting consumption and embarking on a serious program of alternative fuels. And let me add to this conversation a topic which I think we have been loath to address on the floor because of its political controversy, which was driven home to me over the weekend. I believe our energy conversation has to parallel an environmental conversation. We have got to talk about the consumption of energy and the impact it has on the world that we live in. I would say to the senator from California that in the Midwest we live in tornado country. I was raised with them. I know how to run to the basement when you hear the air raid sirens and protect your children and which rooms to go in and which corner of the house. It's just built into our lifestyle in the Midwest. So far this year we have had over 272 reported tornadoes early in the tornado season. Last year, 50. 272 to 50. I would just say to anyone who would like to come challenge me, is this worth asking a question or two? What is going on with the extreme weather patterns that we are seeing more and more of? In a given year, you might say, well, those things happen. But as these patterns emerge, last year, Chicago, the biggest blizzard in its history in February, and then in June, the largest rainfall in 1 hour in its history. Think to yourself, this is not the world that we grew up in. Things are different out there. Are these within our control or beyond our control? I think we have to rely on experts and scientists to lead us in that conversation. But let's at least embark on that conversation by understanding the connection between energy and the environment. As we find more efficient ways to move our cars and move our economy, as we burn less energy in doing it, there's less damage to the environment. That is a positive thing. It also rewards innovation, creation, and new business and industry. So the United States can lead in this area, as we've led in other areas before. I thank the senator from California. She's on the floor now with a bill which she's spoken of time and time again, the new federal transportation bill. There's no single piece of legislation that will create more jobs, specific jobs that can be identified, than this bill. We have spent 2 weeks, Mr. President, 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, 3, the senator from California would know better, 3 weeks on the floor of the Senate arguing about contraception on the federal highway bill, arguing about whether or not we are going to embark on a foreign policy amendment to the federal highway bill. 3 wasted weeks trying to come to a conclusion about a handful of amendments. This is what unfortunately gives our Senate a bad name. We should have resolved this long ago and moved to this bill so that we can say, if you want a real jobs bill, the Senate is leading the way. To do it, we need bipartisan support. At noon, there'll be a vote, and those who are following the proceedings can take a look. See how many on both sides of the aisle will support moving forward on this bill. I think our earlier vote was 85, if I'm not mistaken, 85 senators who said, let's move forward on this bill. I hope we can do that again. Mr. President, I at this time would make 9 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate with the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and ask consent these requests be agreed to and printed in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Cuba. The Senate in a period of morning business up till about 11 o'clock Eastern. A quorum call underway at noon today. We expect a procedural vote on the surface transportation bill. Also today here on C-SPAN 2, we're covering the President's news conference coming up at 1:15 Eastern. And online at Facebook, facebook.com/C-SPAN, we have posted a question. What would you ask the President if you were at the news conference? Already a number of postings. Kyle Sweat says, why not? Why have you not closed Gitmo? And a number of other questions, too. So go to facebook.com/C-SPAN. The question is up on what you'd ask the President. The news conference is scheduled for 1:15, and that will be live here on C-SPAN 2, also on C-SPAN Radio.
Senator Perdue.
Consent the quorum call be officiated.
Without objection.
And be recognized to speak up to 10 minutes as if in morning, we are in morning business, so it's not as if we're in morning business.
Without objection, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad to be able to come to the floor, and I want to talk about a subject that was talked about to me a lot during the President's Day break back in Georgia. I spent most of that week traveling my state, did town hall meetings, listening to Georgians from Savannah, Georgia to Murray County, Georgia, and everywhere in between, and it was absolutely easy to tell what the #1 issue in the average American or average Georgia family is, and that's what the price of gasoline is doing to their budget. Gasoline prices continue to escalate. In fact, I have a Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck that I use from time to time at home, and I had to fill it up last weekend. It cost $78 to fill it up, and it wasn't totally empty. That's a big price tag to fill up a pickup truck. And when I think of every carpenter or farmer or landscaper or student taking their goods back to school to their dormitory room, and think about how much they're having to pay for gasoline to deliver those goods and those services or that furniture, I realize how harmful current gas prices are, and I fear how high they're going to go. We need a comprehensive energy policy in the United States of America. I was listening to the distinguished majority leader speak before me. He made an interesting comment about the Keystone Pipeline. He said, you know, even if we approved the Keystone Pipeline, it wouldn't do anything for gas prices today. Well, he's right, because you got to build a pipeline. But if we'd approved it 2 years ago and it was operating, we'd have 70,000 barrels of petroleum more a day coming into the United States of America. So to say that just because it wouldn't be ready today doesn't help gas prices is not looking at keeping your eye on the ball. What we have to recognize is, in the absence of a comprehensive policy, in the absence of foresight, in the absence of putting all the general things on the table that generate energy, we're putting off the day at which the United States of America is energy independent. And because we're not energy independent, then what goes on in Iran, in the Straits of Hormuz, in Venezuela affects the speculation on gasoline and petroleum, which affects the prices of gasoline in the United States of America. Now, I'm not one of these burn gas right and left, drill as much as you can, fossil fuels are fine. I know we have problems with carbon. I drive a hybrid vehicle, not because I'm trying to drive a point, but because I think it makes sense. Anytime you can reduce carbon, that makes sense, but you can't eliminate it. You can't eliminate it. And so what we've got to do is we've got to put all sources of energy on the table, and one of those is to continue to explore for gasoline and petroleum in the domestic United States of America, off the Gulf of Mexico, off of our coastline, in our national lands that we own, where we know we have shale oil and where we also know we have natural gas. That exploration ought to be replete throughout the country. So we're expanding our supply and reducing our dependence on foreign imports. The best way to lower the price of gasoline in the future for Georgians and for Americans is for the Congress of the United States and the President of the United States to have a comprehensive energy policy that embraces all forms of energy. And to the credit of the President, he approved not too long ago the loan guarantees on reactors 3 and 4 at Plant Vogtle. That will be the first nuclear reactors built in the United States of America since 3 Mile Island. Nuclear energy is a safe, reliable, carbon-free generation of energy. Every time we can expand our nuclear capability, we're lessening the pressure on domestic and foreign oil to be burned. We know in the Haynesville Shale and the Marcellus Shale, which have been discovered in Pennsylvania and Louisiana and Texas, that we have gone from having a finite supply of natural gas to an infinite supply. Yet, because there's some contest over whether hydraulic fracture is good or not good, we're not exploring that gasoline like we should, or that natural gas like we should. We should be exploring it as much as possible because it is a cleaner burning fuel than is petroleum, liquid petroleum, and gasoline. We ought to be doing renewable energy wherever it makes sense, but we've seen renewable energy has its limit. You know, we spend $6 billion a year subsidizing ethanol in hopes it would have reduced foreign imports, but it hasn't. And it's had its own problems with two-cycle engines, but ethanol has a place. It's scalable on the farm in some cases, and that's a good source of energy. Solar is a good source of energy where it works, but it only works as a supplement. It's not a primary supply or source. And wind is great, but it's only great in the Midwest and down towards the Southwest. But we ought to be using it and encouraging it. What we ought to be doing is encouraging all forms of exploration all forms of generation, and all of them domestically in the United States of America. That will bring down gas prices. Now, the distinguished Majority Whip was right. It won't bring it down today because we've put off having an energy policy. But once we finally develop an energy policy and we stick to it, and we explore all forms of renewable energy and all forms of fossil fuel and all forms of coal, and we enhance nuclear, then we have a plethora of energy and we have a lower price and less competition with foreign oil and foreign petroleum, which is where the United States of America needs to be. Right now, we all realize what's going on in the Middle East is the cause of most of the increase in the cost of oil because of speculation. And every time we can improve our position and be free of those influences, it's better for the United States of America, and most importantly, it's better for the average citizens that we all represent. So my message from the people I represent in Georgia, the ones I talked to all during the President's Day recess in that week, is do everything you can to expand your supply of energy wherever you can find it. Take us out of a dependence on foreign imports and get us independent of foreign oil. That will bring down the price of oil, and as a byproduct, that will be in the best national security interest of the people of the United States of America. I yield back my time and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kaka.
Dempsey will be on Capitol Hill testifying about the situation. A procedural vote on the transportation bill coming up at noon Eastern today. The Hill writing that Senate Democrats are hoping to end debate on the bill in order to finally finish it off and avoid several non-germane amendments that have been offered. Coming up this afternoon at 1:15, the President holding a news conference, his first of the year. We'll have it live here on C-SPAN 2. We've also opened up our Facebook page for a question, what you'd ask the President at the news conference. Brandon Little says, why are we allowing fuel and energy production at home to be exported? Chuck Shields says, do you plan to sign the Watered-Down Stock Act if it reaches your desk? He's referring to that insider trading bill, a version of which passed in the House and in the Senate, and there's word that the Senate, it's possible, may take up the House version again. So that's that question. All for yours at facebook.com/cspan. And again, the President live at 1:15 here on C-SPAN 2.
President.
Senator from Arkansas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you. As February came to a close, it left behind an unfortunate new record. At $3.73 per gallon, the national average for unleaded gasoline was the highest ever recorded during this month. Prior to this morning's drop of 0.3 cents, gas prices had been on the rise for 27 straight days. In just 3 years, gas prices have doubled, and they are not stopping there. Back home in Arkansas, the average price of a gallon of regular gasoline is up over 25 cents from a month ago. Many analysts are predicting we will hit $4 a gallon by a month ago. Many analysts are predicting we will hit $4 a gallon by summer. Think about what that does to the economy. For our small business owners and farmers, it means much higher overhead. Those costs ultimately get passed on to the consumers. In very dire cases, which many of our small businesses are facing today, due to reduced profit margins, threats of higher taxes, and increased regulations, high gas prices could be the final straw. It puts extra pressure on the budgets of already cash-strapped local governments. Just the other day, the price of gas has on Logan County, Arkansas. The county judge, Gus Young, noted that if gas prices reach $4, it's going to take away from the other things that need to be done. In Blytheville, Arkansas, which is a 300-mile trek from Booneville, those same concerns are being voiced. In the Blytheville Courier-News, former Mayor Barrett Harrison described how, in recent years, despite efforts to use more fuel-efficient vehicles and to cut down on idle time, the city would still end up having to amend the budget at the end of the year due to the high fuel cost. And for hardworking Arkansans, it is changing the way that they live, and not for the better. It is especially painful for our seniors and single parents who live on fixed incomes. The high price of gas is one of the top issues I'm hearing about in calls and letters during my visits across the state. I also recently posed the question about how the rising price of gasoline in Arkansas is affecting them on my Facebook page. I want to share a few of the responses that I received. Tim in Rogers, Arkansas, said, "The more we have to pay for gas, the less money we have for the other necessities and pleasures of life and living." Melody in Central Arkansas said it cost her family nearly $65 to fill up their truck, and said that they have limited their driving only to their doctor in Hot Springs and the grocery store. And it goes on from there. Many respondents said that it limits their spending at places like the grocery store and will affect their vacation plans. The overwhelming common thread in those responses is that Washington needs to do something about the high cost of gas. There is no denying that rising fuel prices are hurting Americans and further complicating our efforts to revitalize the economy. There is also no denying that we are not moving fast enough to address these concerns. Americans want to know why, while their gas bills mount, Washington does still not have an energy policy. It is past time that we move forward on one, and that begins with increasing our energy production here at home. We have the largest recoverable resources of oil, gas, and coal of any nation on the planet. America's recoverable resources are larger than the combined supply of Saudi Arabia, China, and Canada. Despite that, we depend on hostile regimes and nations who have agendas that are often at odds with our own for much of our oil. The current tension between Israel and Iran only serves to make matters worse. If Israel strikes Iran, there is a good chance that the Iranians could attack Saudi Arabia's oil fields to retaliate against the West. It doesn't have to be this way. The Keystone XL pipeline, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, ANWR, and drilling in the Eastern Gulf of Mexico alone would produce 3 million barrels of oil per day. The lack of will in Washington to increase production here at home is unnecessary. It is a literal roadblock. It prevents our economy from picking up, increases the cost Americans pay for fuel, and it creates an enormous liability for our national and economic security. President Obama has said that increased domestic oil production is unnecessary, as he contends it is at the highest it has been in 8 years. However, you only get those numbers by relying heavily on production on private lands in North Dakota, Texas, and Alaska. We are simply not using the resources that we have been blessed with on the public lands. We can make a major dent in the problem by simply opening the Outer Continental Shelf and ANWR to drilling in an environmentally responsible way. The Outer Continental Shelf alone is estimated to contain enough oil and natural gas to meet America's energy needs for the next 60 years. Energy exploration and production in ANWR would take place on just a small portion of the 1.5 million acre northern coastal plain, yet will allow us to safely produce 900,000 barrels of oil per day for the next 30 years. I've been there. I've seen firsthand that this can be done in an environmentally safe way. Similarly, the Keystone Pipeline would transport 700,000 barrels of oil per day from Canada to U.S. refineries in the Gulf Coast, and it too can be constructed and run in an environmentally safe manner. Tapping into Canada's oil sands, one of the world's largest oil reserves, would help ease our dependence on hostile regimes for oil. As global demand for oil surges and the Canadians increase production, the addition of the Keystone Pipeline would allow us to get reliable and secure oil from our largest trading partner and trusted ally. Unfortunately, President Obama has punted on every opportunity we have given him to move Keystone forward. Thank you. I